Hey, what is up everybody? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Frassix. So it's almost been a year that we've been in this pandemic of COVID, and that's unfortunate and everything, but we are all hoping that pretty soon the pandemic will be over and that everything will go back to normal. But what does that mean? Like, how do we really know if a pandemic is over? So in this video, I'm going to be watching and reacting an infographics video on how we know a pandemic is over. I really do like their videos. It's very informative. It's one of my favorite informative channels that I've come across on YouTube and the internet. And hopefully you guys will get some knowledge out of this, and I will get some knowledge out of this also. I mean, this was uploaded a few months ago, I think, so it's not the most current, but I'm pretty sure it will still be just as effective because I'm pretty sure COVID is not going away anytime soon, at least not in America. So hopefully you guys will get some information out of this, and I will as well. And if you guys have any other suggestions as to what I should react to or watch or anything like that, leave a comment down below, or you can contact me on any of my social media apps just to let me know what I should react to or make a video of. So without further ado, here's my reaction to how we know a pandemic is really over. Okay, so this video was uploaded in August, but I'm pretty sure it'll still be just as effective and accurate. And before I begin, sorry about those glares right there, but I found this on Facebook, and let me begin.
If you spent any time at all on the internet in the last few months,
keep in mind this was uploaded in August.
About how outbreaks start, how diseases spread, and even how to protect yourself during a pandemic.
Pretty sure we all learned a lot.
Pandemics end. How do we know when we're in the clear and it's safe to go back to life as normal?
Like Australia.
Or are we destined to spend the rest of our lives in quarantine? To find out, let's take a look back in time at how some past pandemics have ended, and see if there's any hope of easing up on social distancing before summer is over. Before we can talk about
this
how
was
end,
in August.
we have to first understand what the end of a pandemic actually means.
Does that mean
how do we know when it's over? And who exactly is it over for? What specific criteria or milestones are we aiming for before we can declare a pandemic over? And who actually decides that the pandemic has ended? According to medical historians, pandemics actually have two types of ending: a medical ending and a social ending. A medical ending happens when there's no people left to get sick. That doesn't necessarily mean everyone is dead, although that's certainly one way a pandemic can end. An outbreak can be ended medically when the infection can no longer spread, either because a significant percentage of people are immune or have been vaccinated, or even because of strict social distancing measures making it impossible for the infection to find new victims.
That's not going to happen anytime soon.
The bubonic plague is the perfect example of a pandemic ending medically because the disease ran out of victims. There have been 3 major outbreaks of the plague in history. The first one, called the Plague of Justinian, wiped out nearly half the world's population in the 6th century. It only ended when there was no one left to die. The death rate was so high, and some experts theorized that the survivors must have been largely immune. So eventually the outbreak ended when it ran out of new victims. The second and most famous outbreak was started in China in 1331, killing half the population, then spreading to Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East.
So basically just like how the coronavirus spread.
200 million people in just 4 years, wiping out up to 1/3 of the European population. Fun fact, we have this particular pandemic to thank for the whole idea of quarantine. During the medieval outbreak, people were still clueless about how diseases really spread, but they were starting to catch on to the idea that being in close proximity to an infected person was a great way to get sick.
They just locked themselves
inside. Started making newly arrived sailors stay in their ships for a period of time after arriving in port before they could enter the city. At first it was 30 days, but it was eventually increased to 40 days, a period of time called quarantino. During later flare-ups of the disease in the 1500s, England imposed the first quarantine laws. Any home with an infected person in it was required to mark their house with a white pole and carry the pole with them in public so that other people could avoid it.
That would be very obvious.
Took things a step further during another flare-up in 1665 and banned all public entertainment and gatherings. That sounds awfully familiar.
Yes, it does.
On top of these new quarantine measures, the medieval plague outbreak also planted the early seeds of social distancing. As the plague spread and the death toll continued to climb, many people took shelter in their homes and hid out from the disease. Of course, we also saw the first glimpses of the difficulties of getting people to stay at home. As the plague ravaged Italy, many were determined to live it up before the end. Defiant revelers took to the streets, drinking, dancing, and singing even as the bodies piled up around them.
That sounds
the last
like
major
right
outbreak
now.
of the plague started in China in 1855 and once again spread across the world. After it killed 12 million people in India, entire neighborhoods were burned to the ground in a desperate effort to stop the disease, even though no one knew at the time that it would even help. Experts aren't sure exactly why the outbreak ended. Perhaps the plague ran out of victims,
Well,
or the
that's
cold
not
had
satisfying
weakened,
at
or
all.
it could have mutated and become less deadly. Each of these outbreaks eventually did end, but the disease wasn't gone. In fact, it's still around today.
Wait, what?
Plague outbreaks are endemic among prairie dogs in the southwestern U.S. and
It
from time
jumps
to time,
species?
it even makes its way to humans. Dr. Frank Snowden, a Yale historian, has a friend who contracted the plague in the U.S. a few years ago from a dog that had been infected with plague-ridden fleas.
Plague?
Remember earlier when we said that there are 2 ways that a pandemic can end? We just talked about the many ways that a pandemic can medically end, but pandemics can also have a social ending. According to Dr. Jeremy Green, a historian of medicine at Johns Hopkins, when people ask, when will this end? They're asking about the social ending. The social end to the pandemic doesn't mean the disease is gone. It just means that people have learned to live with it.
Not live with it, just...
And end socially when people stop fearing the disease, become sick of quarantine restrictions, and decide they're willing to risk getting
People
the
have
disease
always
to
been
go
doing
on
that
with
ever since the
daily
beginning
life.
of quarantine.
The infamous Spanish flu outbreak of 1918 is a great example of a social end to a pandemic. The aggressive and deadly strain of the flu virus that tore across the globe and killed millions prompted one doctor to say that it demonstrated the inferiority of human inventions in the destruction of human life. And that's saying a lot, considering the world was in the midst of the bloody trench battles of World War I at the time of the outbreak. The virus eventually mutated into a less severe form of the flu, and medically the pandemic slowly tapered off, even though the disease definitely had its
So it's gonna take like years?
But the pandemic ended socially even while the disease continued to wreak havoc. By the time World War I was over, people everywhere were sick of death and tragedy, and they were ready for a fresh start. After the horrors of war, people were willing to risk disease to return to normal life as soon as possible. The fact is, it's not an either-or situation. Pandemics don't end medically or socially. Most end socially before they end.
That makes sense,
And
though.
a true medical ending is actually nearly impossible.
Okay.
In most cases, we learn to live with the disease and manage its spread to prevent widespread
I don't
outbreaks.
want to wear
But
a
it's rare
mask
that
forever.
disease is truly medically eradicated. Smallpox is one of the very few exceptions. Smallpox had plagued the world for more than 3,000 years.
Yet I still haven't gotten
30% of those who contracted the dreadful illness died a painful death. In 1633, shortly after the first European explorers arrived in the New World, a smallpox epidemic devastated the native populations. The disease had arrived with the explorers, and since none of the native people had any kind of immunity against the disease, it spread like wildfire, killing up to 90 to 95% of the native population in some of the hardest hit areas. There are a few different reasons why our efforts to fight smallpox were so successful. The most important development was the discovery of a successful lifelong vaccine. The disease's unusual symptoms, a rash that turns into pus-filled spots, which crust and then fall off, also made it easy to identify the illness, and infected people could be quarantined quickly, limiting the spread of the disease. Another thing that helped defeat smallpox was the fact that it can't be transmitted by animals, meaning that once the disease was eliminated in humans, we no longer had to worry about it continuing to circulate and mutate
I think I read
in
something
animals
that said it
and
can't.
re-emerging as a threat in the future. All of these factors combined to make smallpox one of the few diseases that we can now confidently say has been medically eradicated. The last person to contract smallpox naturally was a man named Ali Malian, a hospital cook in Somalia in 1977. Ali thankfully recovered from the smallpox infection and went on to live a long life. He died in 2013 of malaria, another extremely problematic infectious disease. The social aspect of a pandemic can be just as dangerous as the disease itself, sometimes more so. Back during the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, an epidemic of fear about the disease spread faster than the disease itself. Dr. Susan Murray, who worked in a hospital in Ireland during the outbreak, recalls the atmosphere of fear and panic. Even as the outbreak was tapering off, she remembers some health
Pretty much the very beginning of COVID.
Potentially infected patients, and people beginning to look at foreigners with suspicion. Dr. Murray said, if we're not prepared to fight fear and ignorance as actively and as thoughtfully as we fight any other virus, it is possible that fear can do terrible hurt to vulnerable people, even in places that never see a single case of infection during an outbreak. The fear generated by each new outbreak also amplifies the fear of the next one. Since a next outbreak is inevitable, it's important that we learn to deal with the fear that surrounds a pandemic to minimize the social harms caused by the outbreaks. Pandemics are one of the biggest threats we humans face in modern times. EndingPandemics.org has projected that the next big pandemic could cost upwards of $60 billion and could kill 30 million people in just 6 months. They explain that because the number of new infectious diseases is rising and people are traveling further and faster than ever before, the risk of a major global pandemic continues to climb. This might sound daunting, but don't worry. EndingPandemics.org has a plan for how to minimize the impact of the next outbreak.
The next outbreak
because
after
most outbreaks
COVID?
in humans start in animals, they believe that better monitoring of disease outbreaks in animal populations, as well as better communication and a fast
that obviously didn't help during this pandemic.
Prevent future outbreaks and give countries time to prepare for the next one. So that brings us to the million-dollar question. When and how will this particular pandemic end? Well, it won't medically end, at least until we have a vaccine.
Which we do,
it'll take time to
which I
vaccinate the whole
already
world
got.
and be able to say
The
the
first
pandemic
one.
is medically over. Even then, we still need to be watching out for new strains of the virus. Socially, though, it looks like this pandemic could end quite soon. Regardless of whether it's medically safe or not, people are getting frustrated with social distancing and quarantine.
I'm tired, but I still do my job as a
starting to scare people more than the disease itself. The end of the pandemic won't be a sudden victory. Even if a vaccine is developed, it'll take time to get the whole world vaccinated. Before that happens, the pandemic will likely start to end socially, as communities and countries begin to ease up on quarantine measures. Another factor that makes it tricky to pinpoint the end of a pandemic is the fact that the outbreak affects different areas differently.
That's true.
Even when an outbreak spreads all over the world, some areas might experience intense outbreaks and high death rates, like what we saw in New York, while others might not see any cases at all.
That's true. There were so many dead bodies in New York at the beginning.
Global pandemic emergency to be over, but individual countries might have already beaten them to the punch.
Like
while some
Australia.
others might still be battling the
Like
outbreak.
Australia.
Whatever happens, we're going to need to learn to live with the disease and manage its spread while we wait for a medical ending to the pandemic. And
I'm gonna
since
cry.
the next pandemic might be just around the corner, we'd be wise to keep our
Better not be.
quarantine and
We're
social
still in the middle of
distancing
this
skills
one.
sharp for the
Shush.
future. If you like this video, be sure to check out our other videos, like this one, called Coronavirus COVID-19 versus H1N1 Swine Flu.
You guys can
How
check
they
that out
compare.
too.
Or maybe
Probably gonna
like
check
this
that out
other one instead.
eventually. Okay, well, that was the end. So, okay. Okay, and that is the end of that video. That was actually pretty informative, and even though some of the things are outdated, overall it's pretty much saying that, you know, there are two options, you know, there's the medical and the social. And I feel like a lot of people nowadays, you know, it's at the time I'm filming this, it's like the beginning of the new year, it's January 2021, so people are like really over it, you know. Like I feel like there's like another surge in many countries, you know, like I think there was one in England, and then there was another one in Japan, I think, and they have shutdowns and everything. And I don't really know when the US is gonna go, if they're gonna go in another shutdown or lockdown, as in like a literal one where like everything is closing down like it was the beginning of last year. So hopefully it does end soon. Like I said, like I just got the vaccine like a few weeks ago, like right before the New Year's, and I'm gonna get my second one in another week or two. So hopefully the rest of the world can follow suit, or at least the rest of the country, because I feel like a lot of places have been battling it really well. Like I keep on mentioning Australia, because like I see all these like videos and everything of Australians posting them like having fun in a club and dancing and just, you know, just having fun without masks, and I'm just like, I want that to be me so bad. I just want to go out and do things. Like I don't want to live my life like this. Just when my life was about to get good, the world got bad, and that therefore made me bad, and now I'm just at this like weird ground level, and I'm just like, no, I want to live my life, but we all can't live our lives until this pandemic is over. So do your part, wear your mask, social distance, you know, sanitize, do whatever you need to do, get the vaccine. I get it that some people don't want to get the vaccine now. I have a lot of military friends that don't want to get the vaccine now. It's fine. No one's really forcing you to get it right now. But as long as you keep on social distancing and everything, and eventually you should get it, you know, once things are like more smooth and everything, and once more people can get it, hopefully this pandemic can be officially over. When it does, I'm probably gonna be recording a video of it, and I'll probably be super happy and super emotional. So just watch out for whenever that day comes. And yeah, that's pretty much it for me. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really did enjoy, you know, reacting and learning so much things about a pandemic, from like the past pandemics to this current pandemic. And I'm pretty sure you guys have learned a lot of things too. So what was the most surprising or most interesting thing that you heard in this video? There were a lot of different things that I thought were really interesting, so I would want to hear your comments, so leave them down below and I'll be sure to get back to a few of you guys for that. If you guys like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, all the usual things. Follow me on my social media accounts, just keep up with whatever I do during this pandemic, because we are still in a pandemic, and I'm just gonna keep on hoping that it's gonna be over soon, hopefully. And until the next video, the wonder won't stop. So I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.